I'm going to start from the basics and then we're going to go through. This will be quite quick. So ChatGPT and campaigning. So just to kick off, I'm Hannah. I am a co-organizer for Campaign Lab, which is a community of progressive data scientists, researchers, and activists who are all working together to develop innovative election tools and improve how we understand and analyze campaigning. And one of the research areas that we've been thinking about a lot recently has been AI and campaigning. So we've been doing a huge amount of research into it, really thinking about, okay, how can this be used in a productive way for campaigners? We do things like build tools. So we have like developer community. We also conduct research. We've got some research coming out soon on TikTok and looking at TikTok and how it's being used in political campaigns. And then we also run experiments. So this is kind of testing things like if we have a Facebook ad that shows a picture of a local place, does that get more or less traction than, say, a candidate video explaining an issue? So we do things like that. And the purpose of today is to just go through, work out how we can think about how we can apply, particularly ChatGPT, we'll be focusing on today, to campaigning. And this is going to be very much beginner level. It's going to be quite a practical session. I'm going to take you through very much like how ChatGPT works, and just the kind of like mechanics of how you can start to think about using it. So just to start off, how does this technology work? So the basic way to try and understand ChatGPT is to think of it as a prediction engine. So its goal is to, when we see it come up with sentences and say things to us, it's often just predicting the next possible word. So because it's got so much data and so many sentences, it can kind of work out the probability of the next word being a certain word, and it will go with the word that it thinks is logically makes most sense. So a good way to think about this is if you've got a really simple sentence, like say, the dog barked at the cat, each word is followed by another word. So you could have the dog and the dog could bark or the dog could jump. It could be barking or jumping at the cat or at the man. So as you can see, at each point, you've got like a decision tree over which word it goes to. And all ChatGPT is doing is just making the most likely decision of that decision tree. So it's just going to the next most likely word. Now, that means it's never actually thinking. It's not thinking in the same way that we would do, but this is still incredibly powerful because it allows us to kind of like see how language is constructed. So it's very important to remember that ChatGPT isn't thinking in the same way that we would think. And it can be fallible, which we're going to cover later.
Oops.
So the way that we respond to ChatGPT or engage with ChatGPT is through a process called prompt engineering or prompting the model. And that's basically putting in a command to the model in order to get an output. A prompt usually contains these following elements, or these three main elements. The first is an instruction, which is what we want the model to do, i.e. write me a leaflet. Context, which is what information we need to give to the model for it to do its job well. So if we're trying to add context to that command, we'd say, write me a leaflet about protecting the environment in, say, the town of Alsager. So there we're giving, some more context to our initial instructions. And finally, the output indicator, which is the type format of the content that we want out. So I've been really clear there. I've said I want a leaflet, so that gives it extra information. And the more that you can think about that instruction, the context, and the output indicator, the better your prompts will be to these models. Because so much about using ChatGPT is in how you prompt it or how you try and ask for what you need. We'll be going through some techniques today to kind of go through how to prompt well. If you want to learn more about prompt engineering, there's a link here. Again, I should say that a lot of the things in these slides are also in our public slide deck, which is on our website. So if you want any more information or detail, a lot of it's there. So that's prompt engineering. So let's start with what are the limits of ChatGPT? Because I think it's really important for you guys to have an understanding of like, what are the limits of this technology before we get into what amazing things it can do. Because that's quite important to consider. So the first limit is that it's not always right and it can make things up. And often the things it makes up can be quite subtle and they're really important to spot. So for example, if I put this into ChatGPT and say, rewrite the above bullet points in the language of a local political leaflet, improve it in any ways you can to make it sound really exciting and impressive. So I'm telling it, oh, the candidate has done 20 pieces of casework. There's a deliberate spelling error here. But it's also the candidate has won a campaign to get a bike shelter installed on Vauxhall High Road. Again, there's a typo there. So this is what it comes back with as text. And it says, what we're doing / have done for Vauxhall. We're working hard for local people to make Vauxhall an even better place to live. And it says casework. Councillor Joe Bloggs has been working diligently to address local residents' issues, tackling 20 pieces of casework this month. It's correct. We've told it that. It then talks about the fact that Joe Bloggs recently won a hard-fought campaign to get a bike shelter installed on Vauxhall High Road, making it easier and safer for cyclists to get around the area. So there's a couple of things when you look at that sentence. The first thing is, was the campaign hard-fought? Is there any evidence that it was hard-fought? Did we even say that? Or is it just making that assumption? The second thing is it's assuming that having a bike shelter makes it safer for cyclists. Again, would you necessarily think that? Does it actually make it safer for cyclists? It might make it easier for cyclists, but it might not necessarily make it safer. So you've always got to be like aware of the ways that it might kind of shift truth very subtly. And that's why it's very important to read anything that comes out of ChatGPT and just check it and just be like, because sometimes the things can be slightly too good to be true. And the kind of errors that it comes up with can be quite subtle. So it's always worth rereading it, especially if you're trying to think about how you'd use it in campaigning. The second limit is a kind of more general one, which is any AI tool you use is limited by its training data. So for example, the version of ChatGPT existed last year, thought that Queen Elizabeth was still alive, even though she wasn't, because in its training data, it had only gone up to 2021. And in 2021, according to ChatGPT and its internal world, Queen Elizabeth was still very much alive. So you've got to be very aware of the fact that these tools won't know everything and they won't always kind of be correct about everything. So that's a very important thing to remember. Limit 3 is that there are quite a lot of biases in its training data, and that can really affect what you get out. So if you are sort of a campaigner who's trying to tackle biases or assumptions or stereotypes, you've got to be really aware that these models basically inherit all the prejudices, biases, and stereotypes of our society. A good example of this is when I asked, I think this was Midjourney, to create an Irish man. I got this very stereotypical picture of an Irish man, which was obviously playing on stereotypes of what Irish men look like, which, given my dad is an Irish man, he doesn't look like this. So it really gives you a sense of how there are a lot of biases, and that's an important thing to remember. Finally, limit 4 is that people are working on tools that could potentially detect if something's generated by AI. This is much easier with image stuff. It's a bit harder with language, but you've always got to be aware that if you've basically used AI to do something, it's quite possible that people might be able to detect that at different points. This is kind of a war between detection and evading detection. So just as people are coming up with tools to detect things, people are also coming up with tools to evade detection. So it's an ongoing thing. But if you're talking about a kind of organization where you have a particular reputation, it's really important to think about the kind of implications of transparency or declaring when you use AI. And that's quite important. Here are some just very important rules for using ChatGPT if you are going to use ChatGPT in campaigning. First one, do not disclose any sensitive material, individual voter information, individual data up into ChatGPT. There is not a guarantee that that data won't then be fed into the models. So if you're ever uploading personal data, try to be basically never upload personal data. If you want to kind of upload broader data, you might want to anonymize it. Take out any personally identifiable stuff. and just be really aware that you are responsible for protecting the data you hold. So I would follow things like existing data protection policies when you are using these tools, just because it's not super clear what isn't protected from training data. There are some options that you can enable in ChatGPT that says, do not remember any of my conversations, but there's a bit of mixed evidence about whether those actually hold up a lot of the time. The other thing to really remember is that when you're using AI tools, you are ultimately responsible for the final output. And you should therefore verify any factual claims, you should check for errors, and make sure that the content kind of adheres to kind of various standards and values. It's also really important to not use AI to generate fake photographs of humans or places. That seems like particularly in the slightly wrong area. Again, your organization might have a different approach to that. There may be different ethical lines. I would generally say it's not great to kind of create fake people or places unless you're being very clear that what you're creating is fake. So a good example of that would be if you're trying to do something humorous or satirical and it's very obviously fake. That might be an area where you might consider this. I think it's very important to remember, yeah, that you're not creating fake news. The other thing is to make sure that any campaign materials that are received by people are authored by a human. So that doesn't mean that you can't use ChatGPT and say a drafting process. Actually, it's really important that it is authored by human people. And do not let content go out that has been slowly created by AI. Again, it's very important to have that human in the loop. And finally, the other thing to be mindful of is that many AI models and policies actually forbid the large scale use of these models for political purposes. So, although some of the examples that I'll be giving you are using this for campaigning purposes, you've got to be aware that if you're doing this on a very large scale, you may get banned for violating terms of service of the model itself. Just a quick note on ethics. So there are many ethical discussions around the use of AI. This is really important. I don't have time today to go into all of them, but I think it's a really important thing to think about. You know, you've got questions about jobs, copyright, bias, transparency, disinformation, manipulation. There's also the argument that this kind of technology is quite democratizing, allows more of us to do more things than we were before. It allows people who maybe haven't had the ability to kind of like create campaigns to do it more effectively. There's a big question about whether this technology should be open source, which means everybody knows how it's created versus closed source. And there is also this bigger question about AI safety, which is how do we make sure these models remain safe and don't kind of go beyond what we kind of expect them to do. So that's just a quick like slide which says, hey, there's a bunch of ethical issues here. Our focus is mainly on pragmatically how you use this and how you use this well. But there are these deeper ethical questions, which again, a lot of the kind of different governments of the world are considering these at the moment. European Parliament is currently drafting legislation on AI. You know, obviously the UK held the AI Safety Summit recently, but there are quite a lot of big questions about this. And with kind of, I think this year they're due to have elections in Europe, America, Britain, and in lots of places across the world. So this year is going to be very interesting in terms of elections and AI. And there's a lot of questions there. If you're interested in ethics further, these are just some of the like areas and the kind of communities that are organizing on these different questions and kind of where they've got to in the different positions. I will be sending this around so you guys can look at that as and when you want to. Cool. So now we've covered the ethics, the limits, the rough guidelines and rules of using this. We can now get on to the slightly more exciting part, which is what can ChatGPT actually do for us as campaigners? So number one, content generation. LLMs, or what we would call ChatGPT, is amazing at generating content. So just to start off, our first demonstration, what is something that somebody is working on right now, which is some content? Feel free to suggest, either call out or pop it in the chat. What are people working on? Something that you're struggling that you need to do. Anything. Ah, I've got a suggestion. Okay. Police and Crime Commissioner elections in Warwickshire. Okay, let's go with that. Short videos. So ChatGPT can't make videos yet. At the moment, we're mainly going to be talking about text. We will actually be doing a session covering videos next. But for now, we're like focusing on ChatGPT, which can't quite do video yet. So Liz, we will be doing a future session on that. So let's do Police and Crime Commissioner elections in Warwick. So what content would you want for that? Shall we say a leaflet? Let's try a leaflet. So design a leaflet for the leaflet and website. Okay. Design a leaflet for the Labour candidate for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections in Warwickshire. Come up with text and a suggested layout. Okay. Right. So as you can see, this is here's a proposed design instruction. Okay, so it's saying front page, middle section, a high quality photo of the candidate, bottom section, a bold statement, safer, fairer Warwickshire for everyone. Inside, about, text, brief biography of the candidate, key bullet points, key personal achievements relevant to the role. Inside, our vision for Warwickshire, short introduction to Labour vision of law enforcement and community safety, key points. Interesting. Let's come up with some key points for us. I don't know if they are Labour policies, but it's there. And then it talks about inside right, policy priorities, lots of bullet points. Back page, how to vote, instructions on how to vote and where. Use Labour's red and white colour scheme, include infographics. This layout balances informative content with visual appeal, encouraging the candidate's key messages are communicated effectively. So as you can see, it's done a pretty good job of just coming up with some content, which is pretty good. So what would be interesting is we can also, here we go. Kate's also said, if you want another example, we've been trying to come up with slogans for stickers that are pro-Labour. So I could say, come up with some pro-Labour Party stickers, sticker slogans for this candidate. Okay, so again, you can see it just comes up with loads of options. It's quite good for just generating ideas. And I can say something like, make these slogans more fun and engaging. And then, as you can see, it can take feedback. Warwickshire, let's get safe and snazzy with Labour. I'm not sure about that one. Community cheer with Labour here. Can you imagine that on a sticker? Oh wow, okay, it's going a bit far, I would say. I'm going to say make the slogans much more serious. Yeah. Okay, and as you can see, it's gonna amend that. Okay, that's a bit better. Stronger, safer, just Labour's commitment, building a safer tomorrow today for a just Warwickshire trust Labour. This is a bit better. So again, as you can see, one of the things that's really important about when you're generating content is like prompting multiple times, because the first outcome you might not like. So the more you can prompt it, the better you'll get as an outcome, which is really interesting. So that's a good example. So that's just to give you a sense of what kind of content you can just come up with. We're now going to go on to our next session, which is thinking about framing. So one of the really interesting things that you can do is when you start to think about your audience, the issue, the format, and the tone of voice, you can start to like get it to tailor content to more specific audiences, which it's very good at doing. So I'm just going to go on to this example. because actually understanding how to frame things is really, really important when it comes to campaigning. So we're going to run an example where we're going to imagine writing a letter to someone called Dave, and we are encouraging him to support policies to tackle climate change and take part in a green campaign. And what we know is that Dave is skeptical. So let's start with just a starting point. So I'm going to say, write a letter to Dave, uh, uh, telling him why he should support a campaign or support a campaign for better policies to support to address to tackle climate collapse. Dave is skeptical. Make the letter short but convincing. Okay. Dear Dave, I hope the letter finds you well. I'm writing to share my thoughts on why supporting a campaign for better policies is crucial. So it starts with talking about the evidence, scientific research. Addressing climate change isn't just about future disasters, but seizing opportunities, transitioning to a greener economy, a legacy we leave for the future generations. I understand it's a complex issue. It's okay to have doubts. I encourage you to explore this topic further. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to ask them to, I'm going to say, Dave votes Reform Party in the UK and leans Conservative. Rewrite the letter to convince him. Okay. Dear Dave, I hope this finds you in good spirits. The importance of tackling climate collapse. So references that he's a supporter of the Reform Party. You lean Conservative, you value practicality, economic stability, and prosperity and security for the future generations. This is about economic growth and national security. Moreover, as a Reform Party voter, you appreciate the importance of sovereignty and national self-reliance. Developing homegrown green technologies reduces our dependence on foreign energy sources, enhancing our national security and economic independence. Our party has always been about responsible governance, leaving a better legacy. I believe that your support is really important. Thank you for taking the time to consider this perspective. So again, as you can see, it's tailoring the letter to what it knows about Dave. You can take this even further by adding in things like, I don't know if you guys have heard of the more in common segments, which are like 7 segments for understanding different audiences. So if you take those segments or any research, and this is one for a type of 7 segment, which Dave could be one. So if I just copy and paste this into the prompt and say, this is basically how they describe the loyal nationalist group, which is one of the 7 segments, which I think Dave probably would be. And basically, if we put that in and say, write a letter to Dave explaining why you should support climate change, we're giving the model more context and more information so it can then create something even better. So as you can see, it's thinking, it's taking in all this information. And again, it's further tailoring the letter to further convince Dave. And again, this is very important when we're thinking about audiences, different groups. And what's quite useful about this is it can really help us understand a slightly different perspective. The other thing that it's very good at doing is if you ask it to write in the tone of voice of somebody, it's really good at mimicking tone. So it's going to keep writing this letter, which is going to take a little while. As you can see, it's picking up the key things from the description and it's trying to like relate the issue to how somebody might be feeling. The final example I'm going to show you with the Dave letter is given everything you know about Dave, rewrite this letter in the style of Nigel Farage. So again, it's going to attempt to mimic uh, Nigel Farage's voice in this letter, which is quite an interesting thing to be able to do. So if you've got like a group that might be like difficult to reach, or you might think, okay, people really like this person. A good one is also to use like the voice of David Attenborough. Lots of people trust David Attenborough. He's quite a useful voice to use. But as you can see, it suddenly changes very much how this letter is written. And some of the lines in here are really interesting. And they're not the lines that we might be able to come up with as progressives. We might not think that way. So it's quite good to be able to like understand that different point of view. Um, yeah, you can also say like a reading age. So you actually can specify that and say, write this in a reading age of such and such, or write it in the style of this place or that place. But it's really quite interesting. The other thing that is quite fun to do, which is a third demo I'm going to do, is you can also use ChatGPT to imagine conversations. And lots of people have started researching how they can simulate focus group outcomes using ChatGPT. So, for example, what I could say is I could say, Dave is talking to his nephew, Joe. Joe is a member of Extinction Rebellion and is very passionate about tackling climate change. Imagine their conversation about this issue. And ChatGPT will then hopefully, yeah, create a little imagined conversation between Dave and Joe talking about this issue. Um, it's just really weird that it can do this. Again, I want to put a note of caution. This is just simulating people. It's not real people. Again, this is just it's ChatGPT predicting what these people might say, but it's important not to like assume that it always gets it right. It is interesting though that it can simulate these conversations. You can also say simulate a conversation where they end up agreeing, simulate a conversation where it gets really tense, simulate a conversation where like, you know, they have a big argument. And basically people are starting to figure out how can we combine developing really sophisticated personas with simulating focus groups and other things. And that's something that's kind of, I guess, on the cutting edge of this technology. But as you can see, you can just do this yourself, particularly if you're trying to think around an issue or what might work, what might not work. If you're from a campaigning group and say you've paid for like polling or focus groups, it's worth like plugging in maybe the insights into this. Again, don't put in any personal details or personal information, but you might want to put in like segments or insights that you're generating. So that is perspective taking. Just to go back to our slideshow, the next kind of, so we've covered content. It's very good at generating content. Our next thing is going to talk about workflow optimization, because as campaigners, we don't just create content, we also do a hell of a lot of other things. We're often juggling loads of things at once. So how can ChatGPT help us like make our lives easier? So it's really good at day-to-day tasks. It can propose event formats, it can write briefings, it can write like policies. I don't mean policies as in like for the country, I mean like say you need a safeguarding policy. It's quite good at doing a first draft of that. Say you need a policy on like fire and safety. It's quite good at that. It's very good at writing emails, doing a first draft of things, particularly emails that like might be quite long and contain a lot of things. You know, it is very good at doing these things. I won't do demos of these things, so we're moving on to the next one. The other thing that's very good is language translation. So we're just going to show you how that works. So let's do create a leaflet for or actually create a letter persuading someone to support a campaign for recycling in Warwickshire. We'll go back to Warwickshire. Okay, so creating a letter. It'll start going. Here we go, your name, your address, blah, blah, blah. It likes formatting. ChatGPT is a big fan of formatting. It didn't used to do formatting, but it started doing formatting a lot more. Okay, I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to say translate this letter into French. Gosh, it's really going on. This is a long letter. I should have said write a short letter. Okay, it's going to keep going. This is the other thing. It's good not to interrupt it while it's kind of working because sometimes you can get errors. Um, wow, okay. It's really going on. Okay. Translate this letter into French and make it shorter. So uh, it will probably take that text. Yeah, and it's just translating into French. So if you're ever trying to reach people that don't speak English as their first language, or you're trying to reach groups, this is a really easy way to translate your leaflets into the language that they need. And there's been some really amazing work done in Swindon where they've managed to they were working with the kind of infant feeding teams and pediatric teams, and they found that they were able to translate lots of their materials into other languages of people in Swindon that didn't speak English, and it meant that they got an uptake in people using the service. They had a reducing cost of translation, and they managed to reach a lot more people with the service. It's a really good case study. We've got it on our website, but it's definitely worth checking out because this is a great thing to be able to do, and it's really important. So again, like you can use that to start writing leaflets in different languages, which is pretty cool. And also, the Mayor of New York has started doing a lot of innovation in this way. He's like, you now have like voice tools. Again, we'll probably cover this in the next session. You can record clips of your voice, and then you can generate it into different languages, saying different things. So the mayor now has like different messages translated in different languages using a clip of his voice, which is all AI generated, which is pretty cool, but a bit scary. But again, it's trying to like reach more people. Just a quick one to show you an example here. ChatGPT is quite good at giving you a starting point for fundraising. So a really good example is this was a funding application. So I made up a youth voter registration campaign called Shine. And I asked ChatGPT to go away and read guidance issued by JRRT, which is Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust. So it read the guidance on their website, and then it created an application based on the guidance for the Shine campaign to get more young people voting in elections. As you can see, it is pretty clear. It didn't need very much prompting to then set targets for this campaign. It said how much it needed. It said it imagined a lot of things, which is interesting. But this shows you how it can kind of take guidance and then apply it. And then I also asked it to create a budget as well of what it was asking for. Again, this is completely made up, but shows you how it can be a good starting point. If, say, you were trying to apply for funding for something, you could get it to read the funding guidelines and then sort of like work things out. Obviously, this is really annoying funders because they're like, oh no, all my applications are from ChatGPT, which, you know, is a problem. But also, if you're a campaign and you don't have much resources and you're trying to apply for funding, this can maybe help you a little bit. So it's kind of, there are pros and cons to all of this. As you can see, like most of this stuff is changing how everything is playing out. We're not quite sure what the impact will be yet. So that's fundraising. It's also quite good at planning a campaign. So I'm going to really quickly, because you know we're quite short on time, is get it to plan a campaign. So let's try this out. Somebody give me a campaign for it to plan. Anybody running a campaign of any sort? Let's have a look. Oh, that's a good question from Tess. Is it more accurate than Google Translate? No, it's not. It's not more accurate than Google Translate. Build a better, stronger democracy. Okay, I'll pick that one from Jesse. So, create a campaign plan for a campaign to improve democracy in the UK. Come up with concrete goals, targets, and a strategy. Let's see how it does with this. Creating a campaign to improve democracy in the UK requires a thoughtful approach. Campaign name, it's given us a campaign name. It's interesting. It's given us core goals: increase voter participation, improve political literacy, enhance transparency, foster inclusive representation. It's given a target: 10% increase in voter turnout, register 500,000 new voters. It's given us targets for each of these, and then it's given us like some strategy, how you'd like start to do each of these things, which is kind of weird that it can do all of this. It's just, again, it's just predicting. That's all this is doing. Spread loads of campaign strategies, obviously, in its source data, and it's just applying them. And it's already put like, yeah, how you would, the different stages of the campaign. And what's quite interesting, oh, it says it's over a period of 5 years. Wow, that's a big campaign. It's being realistic, I think, about how long some of these things would take. So what you could do is you could say, pick a point about candidate training programs. Can you unpack how you would run a plan for candidate training programs? So what you can do is ask it to go into more detail about things that it's come up with. So again, here's a detailed plan for how you would run these, which is really weird that it can do this, but it can. Target audience, curriculum outline, campaign skills. It's done a whole curriculum of how we would run this training program, what we teach. So as you can see, like you can start with like quite a kind of basic plan and then go in and zoom in for more detail or detail or detail. So you can see how it gives you quite a good starting point. Again, really important to check this, really important to think about this. It might give you ideas. It might not necessarily. I mean, one thing I quite like it to do is, while it's still going on this program, I might ask it to stop because this is quite intense. I didn't think it would quite go on for this long. I'm going to ask it to stop. So one thing it might, I quite like using it for is come up with 5 creative stunt ideas for this campaign. And it's really interesting what you get out of it when you ask it for like creative stunt ideas. It's still attached to the name it gave it, which is quite interesting. Every vote counts flash mob. That's not like super creative. Voices of Democracy projection mapping show. That's an interesting one. I mean, it would be quite cool to project things onto Parliament. Walk the talk nationwide relay. A relay walk covering multiple cities in the UK, where participants pass a symbolic baton. That's an interesting one. Policy in the Sky hot air balloon rally. Now, this is the kind of thing that I wanted it to do. So as you can see, it sometimes does really interesting things. Like I remember once talking to some environmental people who are interested in like kids' nutrition. We asked ChatGPT and it said, stage a cool sit-in in Minecraft on a video game to get kids engaged in healthy eating. I was like, well, that's cool. I'd never have come up with that. So as you can see, it's got some really interesting ideas. And you can just say, come up with even zanier ideas, or even more out there ideas. And it can go again and again. Yeah, democracies from the depths, underwater voting demonstration. I mean, that's just weird, but there we go. I have no idea why it's telling us to do that. Skywrite for rights, aerial message display. I mean, it goes on and on. I'll leave that to keep going because we're running up to time. So moving on to the next bit, analysis. So these ones, I'm going to show you screenshots rather than asking ChatGPT to do it, because sometimes, basically when all of the US wakes up, which is towards the evening, ChatGPT gets much slower because there's so many people using it. So I'm going to wait and go through this now. So the first thing that is quite good at doing is sentiment analysis and keyword analysis. So the TikTok report that we've actually got coming out uses ChatGPT to classify TikTok videos by looking at them, and it's very good at classifying tone. So this is a really good example of this. So I basically took a load of replies to some tweets from the European Parliament about policy they were introducing. And again, they're all in different languages. And these were all the tweets. And I just pasted them into ChatGPT. And then I said, classify these comments as positive and negative and create a table. So it created a table of the tweets, and then it classified them as either neutral, positive, negative. So it's quite good at that. I then said, translate all the comments into English. So then we could see, Catherine wrote, excellent to remind it, act to protect EU Charter, classified that as positive. You know, it's, to be fair, it didn't quite get the laughing emoji. It said that's neutral. That is not neutral. Why are you labeling independent journalists as misinformation? That's a negative one, and it goes through all of these and classifies them. And also has this caution, which is quite important, where it says, please note the translations are based on the context and might not capture all the nuances accurately. And that's really important. So it's quite good at classifying sentiment. It's also very good at structuring and analyzing data. So where you've got like just a load of text, but it has kind of a rough structure, you can put it into a structure. So a very good example of this is I took a tweet thread on cost of living crisis done by the amazing 38 Degrees. And they basically tweeted on each constituency these stats. And I basically said, put this into a table, and it could do that. So it was able to read the tweets, pull out the constituencies, put in the stats, which is super useful. So where you've got like long list of things, you need to put it into a table, it can do that quite well, which is always good for campaigners. The other thing you can do is it can do a little bit of data science, particularly GPT-4, which has something called Code Interpreter. I don't think it's called that anymore, but it was in its first incarnation, where you can basically upload a spreadsheet and then ask for insights from the data. And this is really useful if you don't have access to a data scientist. Again, I want to just caution that you should not upload any personal information into GPT. Be really careful about that. I say that as I'm about to give you an example of me uploading my tweets to ChatGPT and asking for insights. So I basically downloaded my tweet activity over like, I think 6 months or 5 months. And I just said, analyze this data, all these CSVs, and give me some insights. So it started by looking at the different like columns in the data set and explaining them to me, which was nice. And then it's started to say its method. So it will proceed with these steps and look at, it's going to load all the files, then provide some general statistics about the tweets. Then it would look at the top engaging tweets, look at any trends over time, and engagement analysis. So combined all the data sets. So this is actually only 13 tweets over a few months, which tells you how much I tweet. And then there was photometrics for each. And basically it starts to analyze what's in there, average engagement rate, total likes, identify which tweets have the highest engagements. So these were the tweets with the highest engagements. So something about the Co-op Party did well, being at the ILO did well, some good idea. Don't know what that one was about. And then it says top 5 tweets based on impressions, and then it puts that together. And then it does like, did a little chart, which is not, I can't share in this, but it did a little chart over like engagement over time. And then I asked it, tell me what kind of language the best tweets use. And it analyzed that and impressions. And then it's told me that in order to make good tweets, I need to engage with others. When I share resources, apparently that's very good, which is helpful because we have lots of resources to share. Events and conferences do well, clear calls to actions are good, use of hashtags, and it just says, any more questions? So it's analyzing my tweets. Again, these are only 14 tweets, but it's quite cool that it can do that. So definitely worth playing around with that. Finally, advanced functions. I'll try and be quick. So we've got time for questions. It's very good at browsing the web. So you can ask ChatGPT to go away, find me all the local news stories about Alsager, that would be useful for environmental campaigners. It will go and search the web, and then it found all these different news articles and then has a link to them. And this is it scanning a local news site. And then it's saying you should go and do this, and it's managed to flag those stories. So it's quite good at doing research. So it can browse the web for research. And what's quite good is it does source them, which is useful. It's also got this new function, which is called GPTs, which is where you can upload a knowledge base of some form. So for example, I uploaded all our knowledge and work on how to use AI in campaigning. And then you can create your own like GPT, which you can then ask questions. So we created this, which was called PAX. I can't remember why it's called PAX. And it's the Friendly AI Campaigning Advisor. So you can ask it anything. And what are the ethical considerations in AI for campaigning? And it will draw on all the documents that we've prepared to then have some responses. So this is where I'm extending its knowledge base beyond what it knows in its training data and giving it new knowledge, all the stuff I've talked to you today about, and it's basically pulling that in as a bespoke thing. You can actually make GPTs with any knowledge base. It's worth having a look at that. Eventually, at the moment, you can only engage with these if you have a ChatGPT account. I think we'll get to a point where they'll basically be embedded on websites and like people will use it as a knowledge base. So if you're a campaign that involves like people needing to know stuff, they're quite cool to make. Finally, just image generation with DALL-E. We'll cover images in the next session. So actually, I'll leave this for today. But you can actually create images in ChatGPT too, which is cool. And just finally, we're going to use something called GPT Vision, which is something I'm very excited about, which is where I got it to look at both of these leaflets. In fact, we'll do it as a demo. So if I go new chat and just check we're in GPT-4, and if I upload a picture of both of these leaflets, if I say analyze these leaflets, comment on their design, text, and say their strengths and weaknesses, tell me which leaflet is best. ChatGPT can analyze these images. It can see them. It's called GPT Vision. And then it will basically give me an answer. So it now has the ability to look at things, which is quite a recent development. So it tells me this is what I'll consider. First leaflet, it knows it's Jacqueline Bond, so it's reading that. The design is straightforward. It uses the Green Party color scheme. It's got a prominent image of the candidate. Layout is simple. Text. It's succinct, key points, strengths, weaknesses. Yeah, strengths, the candidate photo appears friendly, approachable. Weaknesses, the text could be perceived as negative. Second leaflet uses a mix of images and text. Text is clear. But as you can see, it's able to analyze leaflets, which is pretty cool. So that's GPT Vision. So just, yeah, the final bits of this, it's just, and then we'll stop for questions, is these are some of the other models that exist. The ChatGPT, the advanced functions that I've shown you are only available for GPT Plus, which is you have to pay like a monthly subscription. But some of the other stuff you can do just with a basic ChatGPT free account. But this is basically just talking you through some of the other models that exist, some of which are free. They have free versions or they have enterprise versions. What I've done is basically link to a prompt so you can see how they handle this prompt differently, which is quite cool. So you can try that out. And then just finally, these are some other communities working on AI and campaigning. So there's the AI and Progressives in the USA, there's the AI Campaigners Network in Brussels. Here in the UK, there's the amazing AI Civic Observatory that was set up by Newspeak House, the London College of Political Technology, and also by Nesta. So it's worth like subscribing to their newsletter. And if you're ever in the UK and you want to like share insights, you can join our WhatsApp chat or look at our AI and Campaigners Handbook. But we've got a whole section on the Campaign Lab website which talks about AI campaigning.